welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. I'm Molly Herford, and when I'm not outside riding or running or yogaing, I'm probably inside writing or talking about it.
And I'm Peter Glassford. I'm a registered kinesiologist and an endurance coach, and you are here on the Consummate Athlete Podcast, where we talk about all different types of movements and talk to the people that do those movements and try and bring those learnings back to our own lives and the sports that we do.
I feel like next week I'm just going to jump into the intro and do that, and you're not even going to know what to do with yourself.
Well, it's good to have routine.
Speaking of routine, we've not had one in quite a few weeks, but that's okay. Lots of good, exciting stuff going on.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. We got a little bit of time at home.
Like 2 days. That's pretty solid.
That's routine.
Yeah. What have we been up to this week?
I'm just trying to develop routine, I think, not to hit that one on the head, but yeah, we're sort of just in the hunkering down here for winter. I feel like the leaves have started changing even.
I know, it's really disconcerting.
Yeah, it's only August, but
I know we joked a couple weeks ago that Cross was coming, but I feel like it took us really seriously up here in Ontario, and yeah, suddenly leaves are changing, temperatures are dropping. It's a very odd thing. I thought summer was supposed to last like well into September.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see, I guess. I'm hoping there's still a couple more hot and humid days to come, but
I'm excited because tomorrow I'm doing a 43K trail run with a couple friends, and it's supposed to be like 70 and sunny, and should be a really like pretty ideal temperature, I think, to be out.
Yeah, that's exciting. I'm still trying to recover from this 3-day stage race last week and trying to be patient and not go back too soon and so forth, but we'll see.
Well, I'm not going to lie. I think we're going to do a lot of hiking for some of the climbs that are in this one. We're, on the Niagara Escarpment, so there's a bunch of ups and downs in this 43K, so.
Sounds like a good adventure.
Yeah, it should be really fun. I'm excited for it.
Well, we have lots of nutrition questions today. Is there any other newsworthy items that you want to cover before we get into those?
Well, I guess just the typical nutrition reminder would be, well, we'll get into the disclaimer, but also if you want more on nutrition, I do in fact have an entire book on the subject, Fuel Your Ride, and it's been out for a couple of years now, but I think the information is still pretty relevant.
Is that the disclaimer or is that?
No. The disclaimer is that even though we're talking about nutrition and answering questions, right, the usual disclaimer is that nutrition is such an individual concept, right, and
we're not doctors and so forth.
Yeah. And
right,
what works for one person is not going to work for the other person.
Right. So ideas to try maybe and experiment on yourself, mm-hmm, and get help when you need to. Mm-hmm. Lots of great people. We've had several on the podcast, but lots of people you can reach out to, RDs.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, should we get into it?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, first question is from Rob, and he wants to know how to figure out nutrition for long multi-day, multi-event competitions like track nationals. So lots of these athletes go to these important events where they want to perform well, but unfortunately there's not many opportunities to experiment with that format, where that format being 5 or 8 hard races over around 2.5 days. The races could be short, from a 250-meter sprint to a 20-minute bunch race, but they are intense and require long warm-ups and cool-downs.
Right.
So first thing I'm thinking with this is, yes, you might only have 2 of these track events in a year, like where you have these 2.5-day, 3-day competitions, but it's not to say that you can't structure your training to mimic these, even on the road, if you're not at the track. I think you can do, long endurance rides where you sprinkle in some of these hard efforts. Like you can certainly, do 40 minutes as your warm up and then do a 250-meter-ish sprint, cool down for another 30 minutes, warm up for another 30, do a hard 10-minute effort or, whatever it's going to look like, and do a long workout like that.
Yeah, I think you're going to see that in road and track programs for sure, where they're doing just sprinkling intensity throughout the ride, really long warm-ups. So rather, we're all used to sort of our 5-minute ramp up and then hit your sweet spot intervals, right? But this might be, ride for an hour or two and then get in some work and then, finish off the ride, right? And that might be a 5-hour ride or something. So at the elite level, at least that's what you'll often see. Things too, you could sprinkle sprints throughout the ride or something like that too. So you'll see that like sprint every 20 minutes or I think one that got stolen from Mike Woods was like an animal sign type ride where sort of every time you see a sign that has like some sort of indication of an animal, you have to sprint.
Oh yeah, we had the town line rides in Massachusetts because
Yeah.
there's tons of small towns. So
Yeah, you gotta sort of pick the signs, the type of signs you have, I guess, but and sort of make sure that fits with the objective. The other piece to this, I guess, is the nutrition piece. Like, I don't know if that does enough with the training. I think I guess the only other piece on the training would be you could do double days before and after work, before and after school, lunch hour works, just to try and get those multiple bouts. Because I assume at the track you're not riding for 5 hours. You're sort of warming up, event, cool down, sit around for a bit. So simulating that isn't that hard, and often is actually quite convenient. Like, I actually really like the double days, and there's, I think, good reason to do double days for a lot of people. So
yeah, so the reason we mentioned training first is just this, this doesn't have to be a twice a year thing that you go into completely blind or feeling really unprepared for. Because, when you're doing this kind of training, then you're actually also training your nutrition. Side note though, with the track thing where you're warming up, doing your race, cooling down, and stopping for like an hour or whatever, please change your chamois if you can.
yeah, that's going to make you feel better for sure.
Just putting that out there.
Yeah, and I
Anyway.
think I would take do some poking around and find, coaches you can talk to or observe competition or read some books from sports like rowing, sports like CrossFit would be something that's really hot right now. And there's lots of movies on Netflix you can watch and maybe sort of pull out some information, because there are, again, things where there's like competitions throughout the day for a few days. And they actually had the cyclocross race they did there a couple years ago as part of that. So they had a cyclocross race in the middle of all these other things they were doing.
They did a crit last year, I think.
Could be. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of other sports that do this. And I think it's just you try and make that your everyday, so to speak, right? You're used to multiple bouts of training. And cycling's a really odd sport because we don't do very commonly, you don't see people doing double days and stuff as obviously it's all about the 5-hour epic rides, but most other sports do that. Running, it's very common. Marathon running, it's very common. Ultra running, you'll even see a little bit. Ultra running tends to go more towards just all day, but I think a lot of the smart people are doing double days. Rowing is huge on double and triple days. Certainly CrossFit, strength training. So I think looking towards those other sports might be smart. I'd also question that warm up. I'm not a track coach, but I don't know how long you actually have to warm up. There's some good, there's actually like track based and TT based stuff that sort of questions that a little bit. I think like University of Alberta did a good study on warming up for track stuff.
And I'm going to throw out that like even the cool down has been like, you
Calgary.
definitely need to cool down, but the how long is definitely up for debate.
Yeah, I'd play with that and see what again, this is where in training, maybe you can play with that a bit too and just see like what are the differences too. But because sometimes I wonder if we just sit on the trainer randomly just to like, it's mental, which might make it worthwhile too. But just being careful with that too, how much energy you just sit there burning versus if you just got a sprint, right? How much do you like, is a 10-minute sort of ramp up good enough? Nutrition wise, I think that's where double days and stuff, right? You want to be ready to go sooner. So that's where some of these recovery shakes and powders can be good. You could certainly go whole foods, but again, try that in training.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is definitely one of the times where fat and fiber are probably not going to be your friend throughout this day or even these 2 days.
Yeah.
So I would really steer clear of like the huge serving of steamed broccoli for dinner or for lunch, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could do like a rice and eggs type thing, and it would probably go down if you had a bit of a space there. But I think you'll also see just recovery sort of whey-based being pretty common.
And, the usual caveats of don't try anything new on race day. I think it is tough, though. Like, when would you take a gel or like would you take a gel or something like that for some of these shorter events? Or is there a duration where you'd start being like, okay, like 5 minutes before I'm gonna do the gel at the line kind of situation?
Yeah, it's a little out of my wheelhouse, but if it were me and it's thinking about towards like short track racing or something like that, would be probably the closest that I've got. Yeah, just in that warm up, I might do that ahead of time, especially for the second effort and stuff too, just to try and keep, it's the taste of the fuel as much as it is the actual fuel for the event, right? Like I can see where your head's thinking like, well, it's not even going to get absorbed, right? If especially for those short things, but sometimes just that taste, right?
So I think we can say, kind of eating, snacking away on your bars or having some, protein powder post event, but then say like 15 minutes out from each event, like one or two of like those, like shot block type things where you're just getting, it's not even like 100-calorie gel. It's really just a couple gummies,
and I think you
get a little bit of sugar in there.
Like some orange slices or something like that too, or a bit of a banana or something. Again, I think it could be something like that, almost just more for the taste, but then also the fuel's there for when you need it and might be for the next effort eventually, right?
Yeah, but definitely try all of that stuff in practice, obviously, and this is why it's so important to set up your training with kind of a similar event setup, just so you can, for some people, there's a chance that doing that gel 15 minutes before the start of a 250-meter sprint could lead to some disaster.
Sure. And I mean, in that case, again, I would almost probably bias to the sports drink.
Yeah, for sure.
Just because, again, the amount isn't almost as important as just having that taste there, and makes it a bit more convenient to sip away at.
Yeah. And I mean, I'd also just stress like the importance of, especially with like the open air tracks when you're talking about summer, just hydration throughout the day. But even the indoor tracks, like they can actually be pretty dry because they're pretty climate controlled for the woods. So just making sure that you're kind of constantly sipping on, water bottle with like a little bit of salt or an electrolyte tab or something in it just throughout the day.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. On to the next. This is like almost the most like opposite end of the racing spectrum, and I love it.
I don't want to go back 1 second because I feel like most track practices do have like starts and stops as well. Like I think there's a lot of like, at least the files I've seen from people like drop-ins and so forth are like you get 8 minutes on the track and then you're off or something like that too. Yeah. And you sort of have to sit around for a bit and then you go again. So I think there is the opportunity, at least on the mic, like this would be like a smaller example. It's not a full day, but it would be like in an hour, you're like on and off and on and off. And so you can experiment there a bit with nutrition and the starting and stopping and recovering between bouts. I think even on that, like, you have 10 minutes off between, I think even that would be, a chance to practice that and see what works. Sorry.
No, that's all right. And I mean, I think if you just look at any, like, CrossFit games, no one is like stopping, and like you don't really see a lot of people like doing a gel or swigging a Gatorade right before the start. In a 5K, you wouldn't really see that many people like gel on the line kind of thing. So I think a lot of the races that are as short as track events, you don't really see a whole lot of like panic about nutrition immediately prior to the race. It's much more of like a full day kind of like overall thing versus an acute.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay, next one. Love this. Ellen is asking about the Donut Derby race that's happening in a couple weeks. And I've been hearing a bunch about this race, and it's near where I used to live, so it's one of the races that is kind of now on my bucket list, I'm not going to lie. So it's a 36-mile race with stops at 12 and 24 miles, where you get, here's where the math comes in, a 3-minute bonus for every donut that you consume. And he's asking, how should I go about training for this? I suppose the key is being able to wolf down a donut in less than 3 minutes. So this is where the interesting math comes in, because yes, you get a bonus for every 3 minutes, you get a 3-minute bonus for every donut you eat, but the donut is going to take you time to eat, as is stopping and restarting.
Yeah.
So you got to do some math here.
And you said you weren't sure if like someone could come in and just eat 12 donuts.
Oh, no, they can.
Yeah.
Yeah, they absolutely can do that. That's how people drop their times considerably.
Like 2 negative times.
Ooh. You'd have to eat a lot of donuts.
Yeah, I don't know. So I would go look again in that same way in that last question. We're looking at, other sports and similar sort of challenges and seeing what we can learn from that. I would look certainly to the beer mile. I would look to Jeff Kabush was on the podcast talking about his was drink a beer, do 50 push-ups, drink a beer. And so he talked about training with seltzer water because a lot of the challenge was in the carbonation he felt.
And I think that actually would apply to donuts too, because you'd have the same kind of sense of that like uncomfortable fullness in your stomach from like chugging a seltzer as you would from eating a donut.
Yep.
So your training should not look like housing a crap ton of donuts. That is not a good idea. But you can kind of substitute in with things like doing a seltzer water even mid-ride, just to feel how riding.
Well, maybe not a seltzer water necessarily because you're trying to put solids in, but I would think I'm trying to think of like foods that would be fairly bulky. I guess you could bring like essentially like loaves of bread or something.
Yeah, but that's not great either. Why not just do a donut at that point?
Well, and that's what I was going to question too, is why not just do.
I mean, I guess, yeah, I'd probably just start fueling most of my rides with donuts for a while because,
If
hey,
that's the
why
objective.
not?
Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of people, like again, it depends so much who you're talking about, right? If it's someone who's used to eating a lot on rides, eating sufficiently on rides, using whole foods on rides, then that person's going to be maybe in a little better state than this person who's never eats on rides.
Yeah, for
So like first order of business is you just got to be eating on your rides. And then you might just try and bulk that up and just see, can I eat, again, if you don't want to always be eating donuts, could you eat a sandwich or leftover pizza? And I think I would just try and challenge yourself a bit with that. You hesitate to be like, you need to scarf this down as fast as you can and work on that. But it is part of the competition.
That's the technique. I'd also, in a weird way, my other thought had been starting a ride like immediately after a meal when you can do that, because I think when you start the ride full, you're already getting some of that adaptation to like how it's going to feel at mile 24 when you've now eaten 6 donuts and you need to keep pedaling.
Yeah.
So I think there's some value to that. But
what is like the bulk? I don't know what the bulkiest food, because you almost want to, like, what takes a long time to eat? The only thing that comes to mind is like a puffy loaf of bread or something, but
I'm trying to think of like less caloric ones, and I'm like, I don't know, like a giant dill pickle. People do pickles on rides. I don't know. Anything you can do with bulk.
I guess the other side of the equation then is the intensity piece too, because I presume you're racing if you're right. I mean, so if you're breathing heavily, this is part of the challenge, is that you're working hard. So I think the other thing would be, if you're not doing intervals, that this is going to be beneficial just from your overall time. The other way to drop your time in this race is to be fitter and more ready to race. So in your recoveries, you could also carefully, without choking, try and, eat a bar or eat a donut, however you choose to go about it.
I think I have 2 thoughts here. One would be looking at last year's and like, just past year's results and trying to get a sense of like, are people really eating like 10 donuts that win, or are they like the 2 donuts at each stop and like just crushing the actual bike itself? Because that's kind of a better indication of which side of the equation you kind of want to be on. I'm not sure what the route looks like. The other thought I had, as you mentioned recovery, was I think if you're racing it and you do know you want to eat 2 or 3 donuts at a donut stop, the best way to save time there is probably going to be to, in the minute ahead of the stop, like from mile 11.6 or whatever till 12, try to ease up and like bring your heart rate down, because you don't want to come into the donut stop at like maxed out heart rate and try to start housing donuts. You want to be like breathing steadily and like not a choking hazard.
Yeah, that's probably wise for sure. I feel like we're really breaking this down, but to each their own, and all goals are equal.
I mean, hey, I almost threw out, and I'm going to throw it out, the hot dog eating competitions, right? They dunk them in water and like wring them out.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying you should do that with a donut, but you could do that with a donut. And I guess actually even honestly just mashing the donut down a little bit is probably going to make it easier to eat.
Yeah.
Right? If you think, unless it's like a cake donut, in which case you're going to have a little more trouble. But I'm kind of a donut connoisseur, I feel like. So it's a really important question for me.
Yeah, I mean, so hopefully there's some takeaways there, I guess. Like, I think probably the most specific thing you could do is just go out, do some intervals, and just have a couple donuts with you, and just stop on the side of the road carefully and eat a donut and then carry on.
I mean, that sounds amazing to me.
At least on the micro level, right? I don't know if we're thinking like training for a full year for the donut challenge, then there's maybe a more.
You know what? If this, depending on how this goes, let us know how it goes in a couple weeks, and if you want like a year-long training plan
Right.
for it, we'll get on it.
Right. Yeah. No, I maybe some more details just around like, can you really work the number of donuts, right? Because then it does become more of the like hot dog, like food eating challenge.
Mm-hmm.
But if, everyone's just sort of doing one donut at 2 stops, then it's really time and then back to sort of bicycle riding.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next topic. Noelle is doing a really long ride in a few weeks from now. It's 800 kilometers over 5 days, around 160K per day. So that's around 100 miles a day for non-Canadians. And she says it's a ride, not a race, and there will be stops for lunch and support, but she wants suggestions on fueling when riding that kind of distance. And I think that's really fair. It's honestly, it's almost more challenging to me if I think about that as a ride versus a race.
Yeah.
A race is pretty simple because you're like, okay, 100 miles, that's, between between 4 and like say 8 hours and 8 hours would be on like the longer side for most like serious people who are willing to race 100 miles.
Right. And this is road too, so
yeah,
it should be relatively smooth sailing.
So
right?
if you were racing it, it'd be a lot easier because the focus would be much more on like, okay, just, carb it up during, but really focus on that proper recovery afterwards and like the good pre-race meal.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're talking about riding all day, I mean, you could easily be out there for, from after breakfast till you get in with like a late dinner. I remember I did this with Tim Johnson's ride on Washington like 10 years ago. And same kind of situation, 4 days, about 100 miles a day. And, it was really difficult for me at the time, like who hated eating on the bike. By like day 2, I very quickly learned to eat on the bike, but I was not a happy camper about it.
And that's always the catch with these, right? Is especially if you're someone who's relatively fit and used to doing, your Saturday long ride. The ride is probably not, one single day of riding is not intimidating. It's just that it's going to get stacked, right? So even though you're not racing, if you get behind on day 1, then you're out all day, right? So it's even just ignoring the fact that you just pedaled 100 miles. Mm-hmm. You have your normal day of 2,000 plus or minus calories, right? Just to be a person and be around. But then you also have whatever number of calories you put out throughout the day. And if you get behind on that, then it's tough. And the problem is you're out on a bicycle, for the majority of the day. So if you don't eat a lot, then you're going to get in and it's like 8 p.m., 6 p.m., and you go to dinner, sure, but you're going to have to you're going to just be ravenous. And then that affects sleep.
And there's also just only so much you can eat in one sitting before you
most people
sick.
Just can't, and you either get sick or you're just like so full, right? And it's hard. So in a lot of cases, like I just got back from this mountain bike stage race, similar thing. People asked about recovery, and I was like, the biggest thing you can do is just not get behind during the day, because some of the people are getting in like right before dinner, if not during dinner.
Yeah.
They've been out since 9 or 10 a.m. and it's just, you can't. They're so tired. You can't blame them. They just want to go to bed. But then we're up, again, 8 a.m. Then you got to eat, and then you got to get out on the bike again, right? And it's, your body's so far behind.
Yeah. And I mean, I'll definitely say, when you're doing this, like by day 2, honestly, your appetite is super affected by this. So you might go through periods where you are feeling ravenous, but a lot of the time, I think you're actually not going to feel hungry at all. So your hunger cues are just going to be completely messed up. So you kind of have to understand and respect that, I think, going in and have a bit of a plan. And,
yeah,
it might even look like, especially, since this is fairly casual, you're not going to be, as stressed on time and stuff. Honestly, I would even think about logging my calories for
maybe
these days and just get at least.
I think your point
couple.
on a plan makes sense. I think we'll go back to what I've done in the past, I guess, for similar rides. Again, I'm not that stressed on my performance in them, but you want to finish, and you also just don't want to get grumpy, right? Like a lot of times that's the challenge, is that you want to be social and stuff on these. So I think what I've done in the past is just, if there's bananas at the aid stations, I'll have a banana or 2 over the day. I'll usually carry, a Cliff Bar or whatever your bar of choice is. And I'll have a couple of those, and then you're stopping. Like usually the aid stations are well stocked, and again, you're not going so hard usually that it's a big deal. But if you are going hard, then you got to be a little careful with what you're eating, right? Just from a digestion standpoint, you don't want to, go and have this like really tasty thing, and then it's not the great thing while you're riding.
Well, and I honestly, even again, like I would expect your digestion to start getting a little iffy by day 3, kind of almost no matter what, just because again, you're asking your system to do a lot of things. So don't be stressed on wonky digestion. My other thing I wrote down immediately was don't be stressed when you feel like you've gained 15 pounds in the 4 days, or like by day 3, you're just feeling super puffy and bloated. Like that's pretty normal for this kind of event. So don't take that as a sign to be like, oh, I should eat less or I should drink less.
Well, and I guess that's an interesting point too, is that they are stopping for lunch. So, I mean, there is that fueling. So my thought around like, oh, you're out all day and you're not having lunch isn't necessarily true, right? So there is that lunch piece there, right? So that is a nice little break. And, again, you don't have to have the Cliff Bar for that hour or two because you've had lunch, right? So that can certainly digest and go in, and that's going to give you another hour or two where you don't necessarily need to eat. And I think hunger cues will, influence that as well.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would kind of add to that is being prepared to, by the last day or two, especially if this is, I know this person happens to be a very good cyclist who has put in a lot of miles, so I doubt it's going to be as much of an issue. But, by day 3 or 4, you might be finding yourself in that like not hungry, don't want to necessarily eat the like sandwich or whatever is at the lunch stop. So this, I think, is where having like your go-to bar, or for me, that's Tailwind like sports drink mix, because it's super high calorie, but the unflavored one is really, really light, so you don't even really notice it in your water, so you'd still be getting in calories without like bothering your stomach, I guess. So sort of have that like backup plan sort of ready to go in case none of the food is particularly appealing by the end.
I think options, right? Like I think that's going to be, I think you're onto something there. Like I would expect a lot of people would actually go the other way and be like, I'm sick and tired of Cliff Bars or your bar of choice, which isn't your bar of choice anymore. And just want some real food. And I think that fits perfectly, but just being a little ready for that. But I mean, I don't think these, especially more of these like charity rides, more casual rides, are generally not a huge deal. Like you say, there's lunch and there's lots of food there. So usually the fueling isn't so much a problem as far as like finishing. But I think where people get into trouble is they don't eat at all while they're on the bike. And maybe there's like a long period where they're not able to get support, or they're not eating, or they're going harder than they expected. So just having something in your pocket so you can, okay, this is going to be 3 hours of pedaling. This group I'm with is going pretty good. It's just like a normal ride then, right? Like you just want to be eating. And then if it's like, no, we're stopping every single hour and it's like gourmet food, then you don't necessarily need to, you can drink straight water and make it between those stops.
Oh, and this is not necessarily for this person, but in general, having been on a few of these charity type rides, the beer and wine situations most nights get a little extreme on some of these trips, because for a lot of people, like, it is kind of a party, and I'm all about the glass of wine or the beer post ride for sure, or 2, whatever, but just make sure you're at least chasing them with a glass of water, if not 2,
right?
Just to not rely on beer for your hydration at the end of these rides, because I think that's a trap a lot of people end up falling into.
Yeah, there was a question like that at the stage race too, and I mean the thing is, like, it's if you're asking like what is the best choice is not, but it is part of, again, these events, right? And it's often included, which hooks me in immediately when stuff's included.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I think less is more, and then trying to put water in between, and if you can not do it super close to bed, so cut yourself off earlier, is again, just so it's not maybe affecting sleep as much, would be another piece to that recovery. But yeah, that's a valid point as well. Definitely the lunch stops, right, are tough. It's a little different for a lot of people who have been, serious cyclists to stop for lunch. I know I have a couple clients who just did, like a sort of Italy type European trip. And, that was really odd to them, right? To stop, and then like solid lunch.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think just embracing that, especially if you're in a really cool setting, really cool group. And to me, I think mentally I would approach that as just like separate ride. Like we're stopping for, a beer and a burrito or whatever. I think that's the sort of the classic, is this 2 rides or is it 1 ride? If you can drink a beer and a burrito, it's 2 rides. And I think mentally for me, at least, that would help me get over that hurdle of like, we're stopped for so long. It's just, we stopped and now we're doing 2 rides today. We have an afternoon and a morning double day.
To that end, I would actually, especially like given the level of support here and stuff, I would actually probably put a spare chamois in either the follow car or honestly in my back pocket. And I would legitimately change my shorts at lunch. Again, has nothing to do with hydration or nutrition, but
no, but when you're thinking about getting through the not stage race, but the event happy, right? I think that, and I mean, being comfortable at lunch again, if you're someone like myself who would just be like going stir crazy, like sometimes just new ride, new kit. And I would think if this is supported, you should be able to have a bag in the van or something too, right? And that's very like cross country skiers always change their undershirts. That was something Jen Jackson told me. Just to keep the sweat off more for the cold weather and stuff, right? But so that maybe fits too, just to feel nice and clean and ready for the afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people will take that time to like reapply chamois cream or something, but it's like if you could just change your shorts and start out fresh, isn't that so much
and
better?
Make that break just really nice too, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like there's just nothing worse than sitting down to like a really nice meal with like a soggy chamois.
Cool. So I think we have enjoy lunch, be ready for that mentally, and then just carry some bars, because if you do get in rolling pretty hard in your morning workout, as we've decided this is going to be phrased, it's nice to have that food on hand, right? And it seems odd when you're going to stop for catered lunch, but again, it sort of fits sometimes, and then other times you'll be fine between.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Enjoy. That sounds really fun.
Yeah, seriously. Okay. Next question is super broad, but I wanted to ask it anyway. How important is proper hydration for athletes, and how much is enough? So we're going to answer this in super great detail next week.
Yeah, pretty good. I think people are going to still have more questions than they started with, but we have a really good expert coming on, really interesting guest for next week, dealing specifically with hydration.
Yeah, but we wanted to kind of just jump in and kind of talk generally about this. So how important is proper hydration for athletes? This is a really interesting question because, I mean, there's been research done that's, looked at like the top marathoners are the ones that are getting the most dehydrated during the marathon.
Right.
So, there's like this one argument of, well, it's just not that important. But then that's talking about acute hydration.
Well, I was talking about a 2-hour race versus a 5-hour race.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then if we're talking about like chronic hydration, say, where, it's how hydrated are we, most of the time. Like these marathoners are not finishing the marathon and staying dehydrated, right? They're
right. Yep.
They're getting right back to it. So I think we can
so it depends on the person too, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, is vitamin C important or iron important? Like for me, I have maybe a bit of genetic stuff from my father's side. There's like maybe a bit of iron overload type stuff. So iron, if we take that example, is iron important for me? No, probably not. But there are a lot of, especially female endurance athletes.
I was going to say like one sitting on the couch with you right now.
Right. Where it's like, it's hugely performance enhancing, right? Like it would be the difference between finishing, the run you mentioned you're doing tomorrow and not, right? Potentially, or just being able to like function as a human. So a lot of these questions of is it good, we need to ask for who and then what are we trying to do, right? So is hydration important for someone who's not active and, water is freely available? It's probably not a big thing. It could be if they're having headaches or some sort of symptom and, they want to feel a little more energetic or something. But most people are going to drink to thirst and be fine, and their activity level is not so severe that it matters. But as a consummate athlete, you're out, you're moving, it's hot, you're doing some activity. So we do want to be drinking. Mm-hmm. But it still doesn't necessarily answer the question of, for you, are you the person who it's going to be hugely helpful, or are you going to overdo it and be the person who's like overhydrating and, at the back of the race because you're spending so much time drinking.
Yeah. So I can safely say this is the impossible question to ask literally any researcher, RD, anyone.
Yeah, horrible article to try and write.
I've been trying real hard to work on this article on nutrition for active kids, and to even get an expert to give me a number.
Because
a range of
it
number.
Depends, right?
Yeah. But
and they don't want to say anything about kids, probably.
Exactly.
Too.
And it's really hard because, as if you're a parent and you're trying to figure out what the optimal number is, it depends does not help you at all.
And they probably go with, I would think, if I was a researcher and I was trying to answer the question, I would say something like just having it freely available for the kids, and they'll come and drink a ton of water when they get thirsty.
I mean, fine. You could have just written the article for me.
Oh, okay. But that's sort of the consensus?
Yeah, I mean, that's what they've said. But, if you're a parent and you're trying to monitor this, it'd be really nice to have a range. But to get any researcher to give
maybe
you
it's
a
nicer
number,
just to have a tap and just say like, hey, kid, drink some water when you want to.
Yeah. I don't know. Depends on what
kind of parent. Like, I think that's what you see is like they won't drink a lot one day, and then the next day they come in and they'll just like pound a ton of water or eat a ton of food, right? They've been out...
Right.
In the pool or something all day at a pool party, birthday party, they come back and then they just drink a ton of water the next day, right? Because they didn't have a chance to eat and drink as much. They're just exhausted. They go to bed, right? So I think as humans, we are like that too, right? Kids are not necessarily special in that respect. If you're out 43K, you guys are self-supported on this run you're doing on Saturday, you might end the day feeling a little dehydrated, but then the next day you would expect that you're like, oh, damn, I'm just so thirsty. I need to drink, right? And so I think just maybe like being aware of, I was out and it was super hot all day. Maybe you're seeing some symptoms like urine color changing. So becoming more and more yellow, hopefully not towards the brown and like odds side of that scale.
Yeah. Fingers crossed.
But again, that urine scale is often a symptom. Dehydration would be a symptom. Sorry, not dehydration.
That would definitely be a symptom.
The headaches is what I meant to say. If you're getting like, I find for me, I get a headache and it's like often it's just I've gotten behind, either drink too much wine or have just got behind, right? It's been a really hot day and I didn't drink a ton on the ride. Is there anything else as far as symptoms of dehydration that you would look at?
We've talked about cramping, but that definitely can come from a bunch of different things. But hydration's kind of the easiest to check on.
Yeah. And then so that I guess ties into like there's electrolyte balance that's tied in with this, right? So the risk at something like a marathon is you got someone who's exercising, so they're sweating, which involves sweating out some of your body salts, for lack of a better term, but you're sweating, there's salt coming out, but there's also water coming out, and then you're only replacing it with straight water, which then doesn't have any electrolyte. So then we worry in those races that person's going to become hyponatremic, which is, we've sort of diluted our body, we don't have as much salts there, so that affects fluid balance just by the nature of how you pull fluid in and out of tissues. So I guess we need to be careful with that and just make sure that we're not only drinking straight water. But that gets, again, that's this new layer of like, oh no, now I need like electrolyte tablets and salts and all this. So hopefully next week with our other podcast, we can answer a few of these questions.
Yeah, and then hopefully we'll probably do a call out for specific
I think so. Yeah, and really go hard on that. But I think with the cramping, that would be maybe a symptom that like maybe you're actually drinking lots and maybe there is like a need for salt.
Yeah.
And that might just be salt added to your food or a sprinkle into the thing. It might be an actual like electrolyte supplement. And it might be on the other side of this equation. Again, there's lots of ways to tweak this. It might be less water, right? Again, if you're the person who's walking around all day with a water jug and then you have a hydration pack in whatever type of workout you do, you might just be overdoing it, right? And so you can look up the norms on, how much you need per hour. It's like a small water bottle while you're exercising. But I think during the day, some people, especially the ones who are like giant, like, liter of water and they're filling that many times, like you might just be on the high side of that intake. And if you find, okay, I'm peeing all the time and it's super clear, those would be maybe some signs just to back off that and just see how you feel. Again, try it for a week and see.
I really enjoy the optimal urine color is straw colored. It sounds very fancy.
So I used to always think that straw meant like a plastic straw, the ones we're not supposed to have anymore. Like now we all use metal.
Like white?
I don't know. I was just like, I never understood what, like, I guess I was like, it's supposed to look like a straw. And I was like, straw. And then I realized that they meant like straw, like grass that has died, like in the field, right? So it's like a light yellow.
Well, I mean, hopefully someone listening has had this exact same issue and now feels like they've
and then
learned
like
a
I
lot.
grew up in the country too, so it's not like I'm not aware what straw is. And yeah, it was just, I don't understand. I just was always really perplexed.
But isn't it funny that that's like the color that everyone talks about, like straw colored? In no other setting are we like, yes, the color of a meadow on a fine summer's day. Like, no, we never describe anything like that. But for some reason, when it comes to pee, we have to use this like nicer analogy than just being like light yellow.
Yeah, it's an interesting piece. So I think if you find, okay, it's like always clear and like maybe you pee many, many times during the day. I don't know, you put the number on many, I guess, but I think for a lot of us too, you're getting into the vegetarian, vegan, paleo, whole foods. Everyone's, trying to do better with the food. So I think as you pull out some of those pre-made foods and, everyone's careful with their table salt and they don't want that. And, there's a lot of things where we've pulled a lot of salt out of the diet. So I think you're starting to see now people, especially in this like healthy group of consummate athletes who are exercising and whole foods diet, potentially you're not getting a lot of sodium and then we're sweating so much out. So sometimes even just adding a bit more salt in, again, that can be just adding table salt, sea salt, whatever, into some beverage, into your food. Certainly salting your food to taste can be just an interesting piece of this hydration question.
When you said like they are taking away the table salt, I was like, I hate they.
Yes. Well, you have your own salt issues, I suppose, my dear.
Not an issue that I have. Okay. Anyway, last question we're going to tackle for today. We actually do have another few questions that we'll get into next time, but these are nutrition ones. So just kind of combining all of them. How far out from a race do you eat in order to digest? I mean, the obvious start to this answer is it depends.
Yep.
So we're gonna just put that right out there.
So I think let's go through the things that are with the depends. It depends on the event and it depends on the person. But I think a lot of those questions you can answer by training specifically for your event, right? So it gets back to our track question earlier. A mountain biker or a cyclocross rider who needs to be ready for a hard start but a shorter race versus, a gravel or an ultra runner like yourself where it's like a longer race, but they often start earlier in the day. So there's a bunch of factors there. And I think you can sort of look at the norms, which we'll discuss in a second, but you also want to go out and test this, right? And make sort of that everyday stance the battle stance, right? Where you're used to, and there isn't a question because you've gone out at 7 a.m. and done a run before, and you know that X strategy worked for you, and then there shouldn't really be much surprise on race day, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the early morning starts are a good one to talk about because I think like we're kind of spoiled in cycling where there's a lot of starts that are more in the afternoon and stuff. But I'd say the bulk of runs, whether you're talking like 5Ks, whether you're talking marathons, ultras, and triathlons, certainly start
a lot of
quite early.
Sort of 5 to 7 a.m. type thing.
Yeah, like I think every race I've done in the last 2 years, barring a couple of bike races, have been a 4:30 a.m. wake up call.
Right.
So, I mean, I think that's unfortunately the first place to start is the general rule is what, like, eat your meal like 3 hours out from competition.
Seems to be pretty common. You see that 3 hours for that pre-race meal.
Yeah. So personally for me, like, I guess I can maybe kind of talk about that and then we can sort of break it down a little bit.
Yeah, I think the only caveat there is that like you could have a snack. There's always questions around the warm up. Do you eat in the warm up?
Yeah, I guess this gets into like
the gel on the line.
What is
like
a meal? So I guess maybe we'll clarify as like the meal would be like say around like something in like the 500-ish calorie range. So just like a little bit heavier. And then when you say snack, we're talking more like 100 to 200 calories. Is that like a fairly safe?
Yeah, I think that's fairly common. Yeah.
So for me, if I have a race at say 7 a.m., even if I don't have to travel to the race at all, even if I'm like 5 minutes from the venue, I'll still wake up at 4 in the morning and start eating pretty much as I roll out of bed. I don't like it. It's not my favorite thing to do, but I've learned over the years that if I don't eat an actual meal, like I'm not one of those people that can jump into, say Ironman and make it through the swim on like half a Cliff Bar and then get to the bike and then be like, okay, it's breakfast time. I'm going to start eating, which I believe is what you did.
I think we at Ironman maybe did like an insure or something. We might have been even 2 hours ahead, and we sort of did. I think I did one or two just sort of liquid calorie type beverages, which you'll see a lot of people do that, and that maybe buys you a little bit. It's really just you're trying to does the gut need to be empty for the race? Does the blood sugar, are you concerned about sort of just letting that all stabilize? And again, some people it's going to happen faster. It's different types of food, it's going to happen faster. Different types of races, it only matters so much, right?
Yeah, and I mean, your nerves play a role too, right? Like if I wake up at 5 for a 7 a.m. start, I'm already in such a nervous state that the odds of me being able to eat an actual meal are low anyway.
Yeah, that's where, you could maybe play with some digestive enzymes. You could maybe play with, again, sort of the insure, sort of like those really digestible meals sometimes are good.
Oh no, I'm the person that will sit with a bite of bagel in my mouth, just like, you can do this. I can't do this.
Yeah. Yeah, that pre-race meal is tough for some people for sure. And that's, I think, why that meal 3 hours out is sometimes good. But again, for some people, that's a long time to go without eating, and they get really nervous and feel like they're super hungry, and that could relate to a lot of things. If you're more of a grazer, right, that could be very tough, right? So there could be something to play with there, even in training, as far as we could call that endurance, or not, right? It could be. It depends on your event, what you're trying to do.
Admittedly, this is kind of a hard one, and I'd like to get your take on it, because if we're talking about game playing our runs and game playing this race day, a lot of the times the breakfast that you would eat pre-race is pretty carb heavy, definitely no veggies, definitely no, you wouldn't really go high fat, high fiber or anything like that. You're going easy digestion, probably even low protein. So how do we practice that while also sticking to a healthy daily diet?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't think most of us are training every day and constantly, right? So it's really that pre-race workout or pre-ride workout.
So using your either, in this case, your long run or your hard run, I'd say.
Sure.
Once a week is probably a good.
Yeah, maybe that weekend one is the one you try and go after. And as you get closer to the race, it becomes more and more specific. So you're maybe doing those earlier runs and you're sort of just simulating that a bit. Maybe you're not getting up at 4 a.m., but maybe there's some element of simulation there.
Well, that's what I did a month and a half ago, I guess. I hadn't done a race in a really long time. So I had just a long run on the schedule that we kind of pretended was a race day almost. And
I think you shifted more 5 or 6 wake up, I think.
Yeah, I don't think I did a 4 a.m. I think I did a 5:30 or something, but it was still I tried to do the same thing I would do on a race day. Just didn't really feel like getting up at 4 a.m.
And some people, I know, at Leadville, it was early 6 a.m. for a 100-mile mountain bike race, and I pretty much just got out, had a bit of I think I just had green tea or something. And then while you had to go sit in the start corral for a while, and I think just I munched on a bar in that hour, 30 minutes before the race, and then away you go, right? And you just start fueling right away. So
I think that's definitely an easy one for the bike for sure, compared to running, say, just from a GI.
Maybe. I mean, I think when the calories are fairly low like that and you're just nibbling away, I don't think that light snack in the hour before, it's just making sure that it's not you're, eating a ton.
Oh, yeah. I just mean kind of assuming that you're going to be able to eat enough on a run versus enough on a ride.
Oh, yeah. And that's the tough thing with those long days is you're definitely starting to you're just going to get behind no matter what, right? That's really the challenge of those days is the total calories out. So I don't want to sidetrack though, because you were talking about simulating. And so I think that's, again, just sort of trying to iron out what you can do at that time of the day and what foods and what's attractive at that time of day and before that type of challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I think then just the caveat would just be, making sure that after your run, you're getting in a lot of like the, good veggies, proteins, and all of that, and kind of getting
Well,
back
and
to that like homeostasis of like a good balanced
sure,
diet.
but during as well too,
Yeah.
just making sure, yeah, keeping it up. But I think a lot of those race nerves, because that is a big piece of that. When do I eat beforehand? Is just like making sure that you're training, and therefore your fueling is matching up with what race day is, right? A lot of time that race day nerves is there's just something like, what are we nervous about on race day is usually the question you want to go after, right? Like, are we really nervous about being around people, or we don't know how our fitness is, or we don't know, right? And it's normal to be nervous, to be excited, but it's a lot of times when it's like intense nerves, like cannot eat at all, there's just like something missing in that preparation. And it might mean you need to go out and ride with people more often, or train with people more often, or go to weekly races, or practice your starts, or there's the things that we're nervous about. Like, it's often just like we just haven't done them enough. And we need to gain experience. And some of that is racing, and you need to just get over it and race more, and then that's just going to take time. But there's a lot of stuff you can do in preparation, and this pre-race meal, pre-workout meal timing is just a piece of that. You're developing this routine where I eat 3 hours before the workout, and then if it's a hard workout, maybe I have a snack right before too. But if it's not a hard workout, then I just get going and do my endurance workout. And you get used to that stomach being a little empty, which is nice, right? Like when you start a race, you don't necessarily want your gut just like stuffed, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So, and you just get used to that feeling of like, yeah, I'm the right level of sort of hungry, empty versus being depleted too, right? And you get a sense for that.
I think the only thing I maybe want to add to this is just what works. I mean, obviously we've said it before, what works for somebody else isn't going to work for you necessarily. And I think so many people talk about like oatmeal for pre-race, or this thing that they do for pre-race, and like honestly that might not be the right meal for you. So
right.
I think it's not just about timing, it's about what you're eating for you. So it has to both like digest well and also like feel good for you. And it might not be like the the cool kid oatmeal. It might be that you find that like half a bagel is actually
Sure.
easier for you to digest, easier for you to get through. Because I know for me, if you put a bowl of oatmeal in front of me before a marathon, I'm gonna look at it. I'm gonna pick up a spoonful of it. I'm gonna stare at that for a minute. I'm gonna put it back down. I'm gonna keep staring at the bowl for a while.
Right.
And it's not gonna go very well.
Yeah, so it's finding that thing for sure. And for that type of person too, that might be where like that 4 a.m. wake up just may not make sense. Like they may be better to sleep and do an hour or 2 hours before they have whatever snack they can, and try and find that thing that you can actually eat. And again, that might have to be insured to start off with or something.
I was talking to a mom and a daughter when I was doing a talk a few weeks ago, and they had asked me about pre-race meals, and the mom was like kind of appalled when I said I ate a bagel.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, yeah, but like I win races. Like she just could not compute that, this like unhealthy athlete choice was actually what really worked for me. And I was like, I mean, yeah, you can try everything else, but if that's, if an Eggo waffle is what works well for you, then like the Eggo waffle is what you should do.
Yeah, it certainly gets to the elite athletics is not always in line with health too.
Exactly.
And that race day fueling isn't necessarily our everyday fueling, right? And you sort of mentioned that earlier with vegetables and stuff like that, right? And it's just sort of shifting stuff around in the day and still making sure you get your salad or your vegetables. Just, it might be in that couple hours after, or dinner. If you had a morning workout, then dinner can certainly be, quite healthful.
Yeah, and actually, we'll link to it in the show notes. I just did an article for Outside's website talking about my like race day guide to a happy gut, and it kind of goes from like the night before through the night after the race, just kind of talking about what I've figured out over the years that works, and it's kind of backed up by research as well. So we'll link to that.
Yeah, I don't know what else there would be. Like, I think the original question was just how soon before, and I think that 3 hours plus or minus maybe an hour is what you're gonna generally see. And then I think if you snack away during your warm up during the hour before, that's not abnormal, especially for the shorter races.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, we will wrap up there. As always, let us know any questions. Let us know how you enjoy the show. You can head over to iTunes to leave us a rating or review. That's awesome. It's super, super helpful. If you have questions, you can find us on consummateathlete.com. There's a contact form, or hit us up on our Facebook page for The Consummate Athlete. That's where we got a bunch of the questions from this week. And you can find us on Instagram and Twitter at Molly J. Herford and at Peter Glassford. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we will see you next week.